Okay, so it's time to get ready to put the clutch back into the case, into the engine. You're going to need something like this toothbrush, maybe an artist brush or something of that nature, or a toothbrush like this that can fit into the end of the input shaft so that you can rotate the input shaft slightly. Okay, you'll need that to get the splines on the input shaft to line up with the splines on the clutch pack. Okay, one thing I want to go over right away initially is the oil pump drive gear. It's easy to mess that up. There's been lots of talk about this in the forum. It's this gear right here. Okay, it has a little drive pin. This gear can be installed incorrectly. This gear right now is installed correctly. The drive pin is captured, it can't get out. And the gear portion of this piece is closest to the clutch basket. But if this gets turned over, like so, now it's incorrect. The drive pin is no longer captured. The pin can come out as the clutch basket rotates, the primary driven gear it's called. And when that pin comes out, of course the the pump drive is no longer rotating, and the hard pin can get caught in the primary gears or get into your transmission. It's just really a bad scene when you put this gear on the wrong way. Also, when it's backwards like this, it's going to rub like crazy on the aluminum case right here. Everything about this installation is wrong. Make sure that your oil pump drive gear is installed correctly so that the drive pin is fully captured. It can't get out, okay? And there's no way the gear teeth are going to rub on the case. My clutch doesn't use a oil pump drive gear like that. It's a special drive gear, and the gear on the pump is also special. And you can just kind of ignore the differences right now. The process is the same. You know, the drive pin on mine is captured. You can't really see it, but it can't get out. No way it's getting out of there. And the pump drive gear teeth are not going to rub on the case. So you get started by installing the large thrust washer, the 44 millimeter thrust washer on the transmission input shaft, and then the spacer goes in. It has a hole in it. That hole feeds oil into the bronze bushing right here that's in the primary driven gear assembly, or the clutch basket. Okay, that hole wasn't there, this bushing wouldn't get any oil. The basket has to rotate independently of the input shaft. There's a hole in the input shaft right there that lines up with this hole. There's also a relief or a groove around here to make sure the oil gets fed through this into this bushing. Okay? You just install the clutch basket onto the input shaft, and then it doesn't go in all the way. You just fiddle around with the oil pump gear until the gears mesh goes all the way in. Okay? Once the basket is in place, then the 40 millimeter thrust washer gets installed. Okay? And you're ready to try and install the clutch pack. When you go to put the clutch pack in, this may not line up like that. It may not be so easy. And if that's the case, say if this is out of whack a little bit, and you go to put it in, and it doesn't want to go in, that's where this toothbrush comes in handy. You sort of rotate the input shaft a little bit until you get the splines to line up. Okay. Now you're ready to put the lock tab washer. Notice that I've pre-bent this lock tab washer. If you don't pre-bend it, it can be a real nightmare trying to get this thing folded over the nut. Put the pre-bent area in an area where the springs don't interfere. Notice this nut, the clutch hub nut, how thin it is. It's only about 5 or 6 millimeters thick. Do not over tighten this nut. I can't stress enough how important it is to not over tighten this nut. It's very thin. Half of the threads on the input shaft are missing because of the splines. If you over tighten this nut and strip those threads on the shaft, you're going to be pulling the whole motor apart. So be very careful not to over tighten this nut. I believe the torque spec is somewhere around 50 foot-pounds, but look it up. Make sure that you have the correct torque value and don't exceed it. It's tough to get started. You might have to fiddle with it a little bit. It's easy to cross-thread it, so just be very careful with it. It should spin on freely by hand. Okay? And now you're just about ready to start tightening this thing up. When you go to tighten it, things are going to want to turn. And you got to have a way to prevent the transmission shaft and the crankshaft from turning. That's where this soft rolled copper tubing comes in. The soft rolled copper tubing is the kind of stuff you get in a hardware store that's used for ice maker installations. Okay, it's very soft and pliable. It's annealed. It's not going to hurt the gears. For this tightening operation, you're going to be turning the nut clockwise, which is going to try and draw the copper in from the top. Okay, so you get that started in the gear mesh. You can place a wrench on the primary nut and pull that copper into the gear mesh slightly so it'll stay put. And then you can put your torque wrench in 32 millimeter nut. I'm just using a ratchet, but you should be using a torque wrench. Remember, you got to be very careful not to over torque it. And then tighten the nut up. Okay? Once the nut is tight, don't forget that you got to fold this lock tab washer over. I find a pair of channel locks works pretty good for that. You just get the channel locks on that folded up portion of your lock tab and fold it over. Okay? Now that can't come loose. Now you want to take these bolts out and install your release mechanism. Rattle wrench again. I don't like them. Just got to be careful with it, I guess. Just to reiterate something, notice how the pressure disc can move in and out, okay, and the clutch basket, the primary driven gear, is free to jiggle around a little bit. It can't be pinched. Make sure your release mechanism, your release plate and release bearing is free to rotate. You want your push rod installed. You'll have to select the correct length push rod to get the clutch lever position that you want on the clutch cover. So you may end up removing and replacing the clutch cover several times until you get the push rod length just right. Still can jiggle around, right? You don't want that tight. Don't want it pinched. Make sure they're all tight. See, you can still jiggle the clutch basket. You don't want that clutch basket pinched. Okay, that's about it.